The Expropriation Act has taken center stage, this time with international implications. The US is threatening to cut funding to South Africa. It's a move that could have significant consequences for our economy. In his recent opinion piece, written just before US President's comment on social media, Mzansi leader Songezo Zibi characterized Trump's presidency as unpredictable, a terrible thing for investment and policy planning. Let's bring him into our discussion now. Songezo, good morning. Thank you for your time and for being available. Really appreciate it. You're right. If Trump can impose punitive tariffs on Canada, its northern neighbor, who's joined almost every major American war effort in the past, then why would South Africans find reason to laugh and not care, if not for negligence and ignorance? I could only grimace, for the impulsive, vindictive behavior would soon affect Africa in general and South Africa in particular. It was almost prophetic. Explain, Songezo, why you took issue with those who had this laissez-faire attitude towards movements and statements coming out of Donald Trump.
Good morning, Iman. Look, I think for South Africans, American politics can be a little bit like a TV show, like a movie, and not something that is to be taken seriously. And that's because the relationship between the US and South Africa has remained stable, notwithstanding some of the issues between the two countries that arise from time to time. People can travel to the US, we watch American movies, we consume American music, they travel over here, they do business with South Africans, they buy South African cars, South African-made cars, and so on. Those things stay. And so it can feel like nothing is going to change. But what we learned from Donald Trump is that from his previous term and his election campaign is that facts don't matter. The show is more important than the substance of what he's doing. And what he's doing to Canada and Mexico and China is just to show that he's tough. And it's clear that he will do it with us, especially with some of the international issues that we're dealing with. And we must be ready for those consequences.
All right, so being ready for the consequences is one thing, and we'll get into that in just a moment, and we'll make an analogy between South Africa's route and the route that China and Canada are also taking in the aftermath of all of this. But let's go to the expropriation bill. And some of the concerns and criticisms is that Donald Trump doesn't understand the issues, that he is surrounding himself with people, and Elon Musk's name obviously comes up around pushing, the race and the persecution issue around Trump, and is influential in doing that. So what moves should our government be making? We've seen statements, we've seen, what Ronald Lamola, the International Relations Minister, has said around this, and what the moves coming out of the presidency, and we're going to talk about it later in the show. But what else should be happening to provide the information that certainly seems to be lacking when it comes to his understanding and the understanding Americans may have on this issue?
What South Africans and the South African government need to understand is that Donald Trump is the first president in the world who is exactly like the person we experience on Twitter. Doesn't care about facts, doesn't care about information. The cruelty and the rudeness is the point and end goal of what he's doing. We really have to internalize it. There is not very much that we can do in order to convince Donald Trump to change, to become a person who appreciates facts, who appreciates nuance, especially historical nuance in our case. And that means we must temper our diplomatic expectations with the reality that we will still get certain consequences anyway, because he does not care. An example is tariffs on Canadian goods. So the entire eastern seaboard of the United States gets its energy, its gas from Canada. If you put a tariff on that, it means people are going to pay more for fuel, for electricity in their homes, and that sort of thing. He did not care. He did it anyway. So what I'm trying to say, Iman, is that we must understand and appreciate that we operate in a new and changed environment. And what is important is what I call strategic optionality. If this happens, what steps are we going to take in order to cushion ourselves? I have not heard anyone, including the South African government, talking about strategic optionality, and that should worry us.
Well, I wonder if you would consider what Gwede Mantashe said as an incarnation of strategic optionality. I'd love your thoughts on his keynote at the African Investing in African Mining in Durban around this quid pro quo, albeit on the negative side, that if you are going to do this, then we should withhold our minerals.
Well, I mean, it's easy to say that, but actually that's not even the point, because we still need the foreign exchange earnings that we get from exporting so that we can buy other things like oil and fuel from other countries in order to power our economy, to buy components and other things from other economies. So merely withdrawing minerals from the United States, unfortunately, is like step one and not a very effective step. What I write about in my article is that we must look for alternative markets. It's not just about withholding the export. You must find alternative markets elsewhere so that we can have the foreign exchange earnings. So what Gwede Mantashe said yesterday, and I listened to him, is emotionally validating, but unfortunately very short-sighted and narrow-minded, and it shouldn't come from a leader in his position. We must be talking about far-reaching steps that we can take to protect ourselves.
Well, let's go to this concept of alternative markets, and it does tie in and dovetail with the tariff issue, because after the announcement that he made, Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau vowed not to back down, and then he announced a 25% levy on more than $100 billion worth of American goods. Now US President Donald Trump is agreeing to pause temporarily the tariffs on goods imported from Mexico and Canada. So he's reached these separate agreements with them. But these tariffs on China, though, are slated to go into effect today. And China, I think, Songezo, is interesting because, as you write, after the first round of US tariffs, China found replacement markets for about $700 billion worth of exports. And we've seen Beijing strengthening its trade agreements across the continent, South America and Southeast Asia, becoming the largest trading partner now of more than 120 countries. You want countries to run with that, countries like South Africa. So your exhortation is to eschew complaining and pursue action.
No, absolutely. And what the Chinese have done cushions, at least provides a relative cushion. And China is a much larger economy. It's incomparable to South Africa because it is so big. It can retaliate in kind, but what they've done is they've built the strategic options for themselves. They can tariff American goods, they can withhold certain exports to the United States, and they have found alternative markets. The question is, when are we going to start talking about doing that? Which trade relationships are we going to strengthen? Because the United States is the second biggest single trade partner that South Africa has. Just out of the motor industry alone, you're talking about $3 billion worth of trade in 2023. Then you've got commodities, you've got agricultural products, etc., etc. This could have a real impact on jobs in South Africa. I'm not saying let's bend over backwards, but we must be smart, we must wake up, we must build relationships now and stop some of these things that distract us internationally and get us into a lot of conversation with very little benefit for South Africa itself.
The tariffs are punishment, Trump says, for the amount of drugs imported into the United States from either country, Mexico and Canada. You write, it's the first time I hear of tariffs being imposed for a reason totally unconnected to trade, but here we are. Songezo, it gives another hint, one would say, at Trump's pathology around leadership, which is a trigger, then think, it would appear. And again, just to go back to how you responded in the first question of seeing or watching this happen almost through a dystopian lens that you can't quite believe, almost surrealistic. The fact is it's very, very real. These are decisions that will have very, very real consequences. Again, it means that we have to orient and reorient how we see the moves that he makes and how we as a country respond to that.
No, absolutely. And I think we also have to learn how to play and understand the American political cycle, because Donald Trump is on his last term, first of all. Secondly, he's got maximum 12 months to do as much damage as he thinks he should, because after that it's going to be the midterm elections where his party, the Republican Party, might get wiped in the midterm elections, and therefore the mood in Congress might begin to change. The question that we have to ask ourselves is that for Ambassador Ibrahim Rasool to the US and Minister Ronald Lamola, what are their plans to make sure that we deepen our ties with organizations and powerful individuals in the US who are our friends, who can help us mitigate some of the damage that we'll possibly experience with Donald Trump. A lot of countries are employing lobbyists. They've got myriads of people in Washington and in other parts of the United States, making sure that at every level and in every sector, they have friends. I'm hoping that we're doing the same